If you've ever wondered why you react so strongly to certain situations, even when you know logically that you shouldn't, there is a reason. Your body, your brain, your nervous system are still working in survival mode. They're stuck in patterns that were formed and reinforced during early years of trauma. And here's the plain truth. If you don't recognize when you're in a trauma response, you can't get yourself out of it. Today, I'm going to break this down in a way that makes it easy to understand. I will show you how to tell if you're stuck in a trauma response, why this happens, and most importantly, how to get out. Because this is where real healing can begin. So, what do I mean by trauma response? A trauma response is the way your nervous system automatically responds to stress, even when the stressor is long gone. Think of it like an alarm system that someone forgot to shut off. So now instead of responding in an appropriate way to everyday problems, your brain and body react as if you're in danger, even when you're clearly not. There are four main types of trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And if you've ever felt like your reactions to conflict, stress, or to being in a relationship don't fully make sense, it's probably because you're caught in one of these patterns. And the reality is that most of us dance in between these responses. Maybe we have a little bit more fight or a little bit more fawn, but we usually act out parts of each of them as we try to navigate our lives. Let's talk about the four trauma responses and how they show up in your everyday life. The first one that most of us are familiar with is fight. And fight mostly shows up as anger, as control, as being defensive. And if you default to fight mode, your stress responses might look something like this: snapping at people over small things, or feeling the need to dominate or control situations or people. Or you might struggle to take any kind of criticism without becoming defensive. Maybe you feel like everything is a battle, or like things that other people do are always there to aggravate you or to get in your way. And this happens because your nervous system learned that standing your ground, sometimes aggressively, was the only way to stay safe. It may also have happened as a reaction to the lack of control you felt when you were a child, to how you were treated or mistreated, or just not properly taken care of by the adults that were there to care for you. But now, as an adult in your everyday life, this response can push people away, and it can keep you in a cycle of conflict and stress with everyone who tries to get close to you. It can even keep you in conflict with yourself. And I'll tell you how I started to see how much fight I had in me. For me, the realization that I was living in perpetual anger came when a complete stranger, a person who didn't know anything about me, about who I was or what my family life had been like, told me that I was acting in a very aggressive way. Talk about awkward. And it shocked me that this man, this stranger, could see the thing that I was sure no one could see. I think before that, I thought that my anger was some sort of invisible thing that I kept in here and no one else was privy to. And that if I pretended it wasn't there, I wouldn't have to deal with it. All I had to do was not look directly at it. And here was this completely random person who was distressed, not by anything I was doing in particular, but just by my overwhelmingly angry energy. I was in my early 20s at this point, and this is when I really started to see myself and to see the damage that the little boat of Madalena had taken on in its younger years. I was like a sinking ship at this point, and I didn't even want to look at the leaks because it meant I'd have to start patching this boat up. And I had absolutely no idea how to do that or where to start. But this for me was a start because it was one of the moments when I began to see the truth of what complex trauma had led to in my life. The other very common response to trauma is flight. And this usually shows up as avoidance or as overworking yourself or being a perfectionist. And if this is a common stress response for you, it's because your nervous system believes that escaping is the safest option. And in your day-to-day life now, it might show up as always trying to stay busy so you can avoid feeling too much, or feeling like you have to be perfect so that you're not rejected. Or maybe you have trouble relaxing because slowing down doesn't feel safe. It feels like if you're not doing, then you're not earning love or you're not earning your way. You might feel overwhelmed by small problems and feel that you need to run away from them. When we're stuck in flight mode, we often look deceivingly successful from the outside because we're doing so much. We're running around accomplishing things and getting things done. But on the inside, we are completely exhausted. We're running ourselves down because we're always trying to get away from an invisible threat. whether that's the threat of getting too involved, of feeling too much, of being betrayed, or the threat of being rejected or abandoned. Another one of the main trauma responses is to basically freeze, and this looks like becoming numb, procrastination, sabotaging ourselves, or feeling stuck. And freeze mode is when your brain decides, well, I can't fight and I can't run, so I'll do the only other thing I can think of and just shut down. If you regularly get stuck in freeze, you might notice that you feel emotionally numb or disconnected, or you have a hard time making decisions, even small ones like what you should have for breakfast or what kind of bread you should pick up from the grocery store. You might procrastinate to the point of sabotaging yourself, or you just feel stuck in life like nothing ever changes. Freeze mode is what happens when your nervous system decides that the safest thing to do is absolutely nothing. And while this is another type of reaction that protected you at one time, now it just keeps you from moving forward in life. Fawn. The last of the main trauma responses is fawn, and fawn looks like people-pleasing or not having good boundaries or being afraid of any kind of conflict. And if you're stuck in fawn mode a lot, it's because your survival instinct tells you that the safest way to stay safe and protected is to keep other people happy at all costs. And what might this look like? Well, for many of us, it looks like saying yes when you really want to say no, or ignoring your own needs to avoid upsetting other people, especially people close to you. It might also look like not being able to set boundaries because you're afraid of being rejected or abandoned if you do set a firm boundary. You might also feel responsible for other people's emotions. And fawning usually happens if you grow up in a home where keeping people happy feels necessary for your emotional or physical safety. So, for example, if as a child you see that when your dad gets frustrated, that turns into anger, and anger then turns into a big week-long argument in your house that scares you and makes you feel unsafe, then your child brain understands that the best way for you to avoid that big argument is to make sure that you never give your dad a reason to be frustrated. You basically take on his frustration as something that you are now in charge of trying to handle and avoid. And of course, this doesn't make any sense as an adult, but as a child, there was no way for you to see that. So you learn to function in this way, trying to respond to other people's emotional reactions before they turn into a real problem. And now as an adult, you act like a barometer for other people's moods and unhappinesses. If you notice a look of unhappiness passing over your partner's face, your brain goes into overdrive, and now you want to ask him a million questions about what's wrong. Because the last thing you want is to let that look of unhappiness turn into any kind of negative reaction, because you know very well what that led to when you were a child. The problem is that your emotional management of other people leaves you feeling drained and unseen and unfulfilled, because you can never be yourself if you're always afraid of how the other person is going to react. If their reaction is always your main concern, you can't do anything that you might be judged for. And this also leaves the other person feeling exhausted and frustrated. Because if your emotional reactions are healthy and with reasonable cause, you don't really want to be emotionally managed by another person. This is a really, really common scenario that happens in relationships where one person has complex trauma. So how can you break free from these automatic trauma responses? The first step to breaking free is recognizing your patterns. As soon as you become aware that you're reacting from an old trauma response, instead of making a conscious choice, you create the power gap that I like to talk about, the space where you can start making different choices. Here's how you can shift out of survival mode and into real emotional freedom. First, pause and see the truth of what's happening. When you feel yourself reacting, stop and ask yourself, am I responding to what's happening now, or am I reacting from an old pattern? Just noticing this creates space for change to take place. Re-regulate your nervous system. Your body needs to learn that it is safe, so you can use grounding techniques like deep breathing, cold exposure, physical movement to interrupt your automatic trauma responses. And question the automatic thoughts that come up. Trauma responses depend on you running on autopilot. When a reaction kicks in, question it with curiosity. Is it true, this thing that I think is happening? Could I be wrong? Do I have to respond in this way? And what else could I do? Use that power gap. Instead of reacting instantly, give yourself space to choose a different response. Every time you do this, you're rewiring your nervous system for the opportunity of a new response. Start practicing small, safe choices. If you're stuck in fawn mode, for example, practice saying no to small things that you don't want to do or that you are uncomfortable with. And if you often find yourself in flight mode, practice taking breaks without feeling guilty. Healing is not as simple as getting rid of your trauma responses. Real and long-lasting healing is about learning how to recognize these automatic trauma responses, interrupting the patterns that we live in, and then choosing new reactions. It might seem impossible if you've never tried to do this, but I promise it's absolutely doable. So tell me in the comments, which trauma response do you recognize in yourself? What do you default to? And if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe, because we're going to keep breaking this all down together. You always have more power than you know, so use it.